Hey, going live, Facebook, what's going on? Let's see if I can get this all sorted. You guys there? Let me see if I can see anybody here. Oh, there he is. Hey, what's up, guys? Bucky. Do me a favor, if you're just logging on, go ahead and write me a comment. Let me know who you are and where you're signing in from. Just wanted to check in. I'm thinking about a couple things later. I just got back from a 2-week trip in Bermuda. I was working with the local government over there with some at-risk youth. And one of the things that consistently comes up, not only working with students but also working with adults, is this conversation of how do I move towards the things that I want in my life, and how do I really create the life of my dreams, or how do I really move towards what I'm inspired by. And for me, it's been an interesting process. It's been a long time of asking myself that question of, what am I really inspired by? And, even when you get the answer, it's the willingness to follow that. And, there's so much fear and there's so much pressure or false pressure that we get from outside sources, and even from our own lives and our own selves. And we put on ourselves of how we think we're supposed to live and what we think we're supposed to do and what's right and what's wrong. And, I just want to answer some of those questions today and just kind of get into it a little bit on this Facebook Live. So, as we go through this, if you have questions or if you have comments, go ahead and put them in there. But I'm going to talk about a couple different things. And, I think the first thing in having what you want, and I talk about this a lot in a lot of the posts that I do, is really get into this sense of connection. And there's a lot of different ways to get connected, obviously. And I think everybody knows in some way how to get connected. And what are the things that cause you to feel grounded, whether that's time with family, or maybe some time in church, or time spiritually, or time in nature, or time in some physical activity. I know for me, the longest time when I was a kid, I used to love sports, and part of the reason why I loved sports was the physical exhaustion, right? My favorite part of sports was not necessarily the game. My favorite part of sports was practice, because I would work myself into this physical exhaustion that would put me into a place of being so present and so connected that there wasn't any other thoughts. And for me, as a young person, I had a lot of self-doubt. I had a lot of questioning that I put on myself, and had a lot of disbelief. So sports was an outlet for me to feel grounded and feel connected. I've talked about this a lot now. It's like my new kind of sport that I'm involved with is surfing. And surfing is one of those things that does a lot of things for me. It gets me engaged spiritually. It gets me connected. Puts me in nature, puts me in water, which is, kind of my element. And this is the thing, right? Big part of life is about observing ourselves and noticing ourselves, and knowing when we feel connected and when we feel disconnected, right? That internal guidance system that we all have, our feelings and our emotions, and where do I feel out of sorts, and when do I feel in flow, and how do I really monitor that, and how can I gauge not only things that are going on externally in my life, but also the things that are going on internally in my life, to really get clear about where I'm at and where I'm sitting and how things are working. So in this process, how do I get really clear, and how do I get close to the things that I want? I think number one is to stay in connection. Find something in your life that keeps you connected, and do that consistently, because in that connected space is really where you're going to create a lot of clarity, and that's part number two. And a lot of people talk about this piece on clarity is power, right? And it is in a lot of ways. It's very powerful to be clear, and there's so many stories about people achieving the phenomenal things in their life just because they had the vision of things. And I think one of the kind of cliche sayings is that people don't achieve what they want out of life because they don't know what they want. And clarity is the idea of just getting clear about what it is that you want, what it is that you want to create, what's the path that's going to get you there. And here's the funny thing about clarity, right? Like, for all us control freaks, like, I know for me, clarity is something that's really important. It's probably one of my highest values, and it's probably one of my highest limitations, because in the moment that I decide that this is what I want to do and this is how I'm going to get there, is the moment that I limit myself. So there's a combination of how do I get clear and how do I use clarity. I mean, one of the things to say is, like, am I clear about who I am, right? Do I have clarity about who I am, and do I have clarity about what I want? And then can I hold that intention and allow life to take shape and allow things to move towards those things without restriction? And I think one of the things that we constantly do is we constantly restrict the possibilities, because we think that we have a plan, and we think that our plan is better than anybody else's plan, and there could be no other way than our plan. And that rigidity is what keeps us stuck in a lot of ways. So The invitation with the clarity is, again, those two things. Are you clear about who you are, and are you clear about who you want, what you want, and do you allow the space and time to unfold so that that manifestation of what it is that you want to create can take shape in front of you, and then can you see it in order to act upon that? And I know that's something that seems maybe a little abstract for a lot of us, but at the highest level, you know, when you're talking about achieving your life's purpose or your life passion, it's beyond the to-do list. It's beyond the checklist. It's this level of intuition, this level of knowing that happens inside of yourselves, but also the observation of what's happening in the outside world in comparison to that, so that you can start to understand a relationship between how I feel internally versus what is reflected externally. How can I really create that alignment in that space? So that's part number 2. And I think, you know, the third part in that, so connection, clarity, the third part is action. You know, so much of what we do and how we move forward and how we gain traction and how we get feedback in our life is simply through the process of acting. And, you know, it doesn't mean that you're always going to get things right. It doesn't mean that, you know, every single step of the road or every single step that you take is going to be a right one. There's going to be lots of steps that you take that aren't right, you know. So, you know, I think about owning my own business, and I think about traveling to different parts of the world, and I think about being a speaker, and there were so many times where I got on stage and I made mistakes, and there's so many things that I've done in my business along the way where things haven't worked. I started a property management business I started a property management business a while ago, and you know, it's one of those things that I had a lot of learning in, because it wasn't necessarily my expertise, and yes, it was going to fill some of my wants and some of my needs, but at the same time, there was so much learning as far as the level of connection and what was right for me and what was wrong for me. And I think we all constantly do that. The challenge is that sometimes when we make those mistakes or we take those wrong steps, that we get down on ourselves and we start to hold ourselves back and we start to restrict ourselves, and we say, you know what, you know, it becomes the evidence to why we shouldn't step forward any further. So, you know, I think in understanding that in action, you're going to get feedback. And part of the why behind the action is to get the feedback so that you can see what's working and what's not working. And it's that reassessment, right? It's the reassessment of my actions to figure out, am I moving towards the places that I want to move in? And that kind of leads me to, again, this is a 5-step, right? So I've talked about connection, starting with connection. How do I get connected? Clarity, how do I build clarity on who I am and what do I want? Action, how do I move that into a process of taking steps? And the 4 steps is really about observation, and how do I, and I've started to talk about that a little bit, but how do I really start to see myself from outside of myself, and how can I really observe what's happening on the exterior as well as what's happening on the interior? And that's such an important part. I know I've kind of said it a lot, but it's such an important part of moving and navigating through this kind of invisible field of creating what I want in my life. And looking at, you know, because it's always like, you know, how do I get to the places that I want to be in the shortest amount of time, right? And how do I really maximize my efforts, and how do I really make sure that that I'm taking full advantage of everything around me? And you know, it's been such a learning for me, because there's been so many times, like I said before, that I've been stuck in a plan about how I think things need to go, and I argue it and I fight with people about it, and I just get into a space of like, no, this is the only way. And more times than not, you know, when I start to feel that energy inside myself that's like, oh, so much resistance, and I feel like I'm swimming upstream and I'm like really working hard at this thing, and it's like not really getting the progress, and I'm so adamant of that it has to be this way. You know, a lot of times it's just like, wow, I just need to let go a minute. I just need to release, and I just need to allow these things to take shape. And even if you feel like, man, you know, but I had this plan and I had this timeline, and I'm going to move this thing forward, and now, you know, it feels like I'm taking steps back. A lot of times those steps back are a realignment, a step in the right direction. And you know, it's an interesting process, because a lot of times it's difficult to trust that space. It's difficult to trust that, you know, life is working for us. It's difficult to trust that, well, if it's outside of my understanding, that they could be right. And just to let go into, you know, this conversation of leading with faith, and knowing that as I continuously hold that destiny or hold that object in my mind, and as I work towards those things, that part of my job is to really observe that and to see how I'm stepping and to make choices based on the feedback that I'm getting. That's what we're constantly doing. We're constantly getting feedback externally and internally, and how do we make choices depending on that feedback? And then the last step, you know, is similar to the third step, which is action, but the last step is, you know, response. Like, how do I respond to that, and how do I really move forward in that space? because there's going to be all kinds of times where that we don't know what to do, right? And one of the things that people say is like, when you don't know what to do is when you know exactly what to do. And that level of trust in ourselves and that level of listening and understanding and just acting and the willingness to act, I think so many of us get stuck in the space of not knowing, and we're paralyzed by the fear of not knowing and the assumption that the next step is going to be the wrong one, or the next step is going to get us to a place where we are judged, or we're in a space of failure, or we're in a space of learning, or we're in a space of not moving towards the things that we want. So we stay stuck. We stay where we think it's safe, and in that, is the essence of our upset. It's the essence of our disappointment. It's the essence of, it's the time that you're wasting. It's the seconds, the moments, the days, the years, the decades for some of us that go on with us wanting to do these things in our lives, but we're not accomplishing them because we're so scared of not knowing. And, my intention in this video is just to bring some clarity to that process. And I think one of the things that I've learned in life, and one of the things that I've learned with working with a bunch of different people, is there's so many things that all of us go through, and there's so many similarities in who we are and what we're looking to create, and the challenges that we have. And it's not that it's simple, but it's nice to have an awareness to that. It's nice to have a roadmap to that, and to know that we're not the only ones on this process. You're not the only one on this journey of self-discovery and self-expression. In fact, I think that is kind of the only game that we always play, and some of us play it more actively than others. And I think in the moments when we're the happiest in our lives, in the moments is that when we're playing that game full out, when we're playing that game of like, I'm going to be who I am, I'm going to express who I am in all the ways that I can. And that, in its essence, gives us joy. That gives us so much excitement, so much freedom to know that, you're in the work of being you. And that we're not stuck in some paradigm of who we think we need to be, and what we think we need to do, and how much money we think we need to earn, and all the things, all the things that we constantly are in. And I think one of the things to bring up is that when you start to feel like you're stuck, when you start to feel consistently frustrated, when you start to feel low energy, and you start to feel tired, and you start to feel exhausted, and you feel like things aren't moving in the right direction, that is a call sign that your body's giving you that it's time to do something different. And it doesn't really matter what that different thing is. Like, when you say, well, what is it there to do different? Like, what's the answer to that question? And go out and do it. It's like that traction and that movement and that level of like just something is going to create a difference, and it's going to create a shift. And that energy, when it sits inside of us, if it stays too long, it starts to grow stagnant. And there's all kinds of different things that can happen to us emotionally, physically. We start to come up with different ailments within the physical body because of our emotional stuckness. And, I think that our body does a lot of amazing things, right? Our body is absolutely incredible, and it's always kind of talking to us and saying, hey, things are working versus things aren't working. And one of the things that we have to learn to do is really start to pay attention to that, because it comes to a point where that conversation just gets louder and louder and louder and louder, depending on where we're at and our level of listening. And part of the quantum leap, or part of the accelerated version in this game called life, is really getting to understand your body really quickly, and understanding the things that are going on for you, whether that's in your physical body or your emotional body, and then choosing, what up, Chica? That it, buddy. And then choosing to do something different, choosing to be in action, choosing to be moving forward, be in observation of that action. Again, if you could be in that connection, you can be in that clarity, you can be in that action, you can be in that observation, and then you can be in that response to the observation, and you're constantly moving towards those things. And that relentless pursuit of the things that we want in our lives, that relentless pursuit, there is no plan B, there is only plan A, and that plan A is the full expression of who we are, and the trust and the faith in that to constantly move through that. And it doesn't matter if it takes a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, we are constantly moving towards that always. And again, when we're in that space is in the times where we feel the most alive. It's the time where we can look back on and we say, hey, I remember doing that thing and meeting that person and traveling to that place and having that experience and starting that business and having those relationships. Like, those are the times where we're really in full expression, and the rest of it is just kind of It's sheeple stuff. It's the 9 to 5. It's the robot work. It's like, hey, this is what I do, the same thing every single day. It's what we've trained to do. It's what we've been conditioned to do, but it's not who we are on a human level. And I think at some point, someday, everybody has to address that, and everybody has to sit with that choice with themselves and say, you know what, am I willing to get up off the mat and do something about it? Or am I going to sit here and waste my life and be stuck in something that I hate? And there comes different points. Everybody has different tipping points, and this message is really for those of us who are at that tipping point, who are ready for something different, who've been sitting on something for a while, and it's like, you know what, like, I've had enough, like, I'm good to go, and like, whatever it is, like, I cannot stay in the place that I'm at, and this mundane life and this mediocre life is no longer okay for me. And I think it's one of the biggest things. That piece right there is one of the things that is the biggest threats to all of humanity, is this piece of mediocrity and like being okay, the apathy of everything is okay, like the okayness of life, or the good, like it's pretty good part of life. It's like, that is seriously the killer of all dreams. It's like, I'm making decent money, I have a decent relationship, I drive a decent car, like I'm in decent health. Well, it's not as bad as this guy, but it's not as good as it could be. Like, that piece of like, this is okay, is just such a, it's so sad, because so many people give up what's possible in their life for what is acceptable. And I think one of the biggest things that we constantly talk about in this field is, how do I constantly raise my standards so it's in alignment with who I am? How can I take myself to the next level? If I look at all the aspects of who I am, if I look at my personal life, my financial life, my physical life, my spiritual life, all those different things, if I look at my relationships, how do I take, or my career, how do I take all of that and really take it to the next level, not from a perspective of this is what I need to do, but from a perspective of this is who I am. And if I really get clear on all those things, and I spend some time with myself, like, what is it going to take for me to do that, and how can I process, and how can I start to process those steps and be in action in those steps? And this is the conversation that we're in, right? This is the guidelines to do that. And again, I'll go through it one more time. Connection, right, is number one. How do I get grounded, connected? Always starts with connection, right? How do I get in touch with who I am and get congruent with who I am and start to feel into who I am beyond my physical form, but connected to spirit, connected to nature, connected to source, right? From there, how do I get clear? How do I get really clear and start to be able to define who I am and what it is that I want to create? And again, if I do my assessment of all the aspects of who I am, and I say, hey, what do I want to create within my finances? What do I want to create within my physical health? What do I want to create within my spirituality? What do I want to create in my relationships? What are those things? How do I get absolutely clear on it? And then how do I just instantly get into action? And again, knowing that in those actions, there's going to be things that you do right, there's going to be things that you're going to do wrong. But the next step is really about observation and watching yourself to figure out what's working, what's not working, and using your life's reflection and your internal work as a guide to figure out what's working, again, what's working, what's not working, where can I move next, how can I respond? And again, that's the last step, is responding to those understandings and those messages that you're getting from yourself and the world around you, and then constantly being in that cycle of connection, clarity, action, observation, and response, right? Constantly, over and over and over again, of connection, clarity, action, observation, and response, and how I just relentlessly work on those things with a willingness and a mindset that, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to have the things that I want. So with that said, lots of love. If you have comments or if you have questions, I know Chica's on here. Great to see you, buddy. I know that you're doing great work too. It's good to see you, man. If you have questions, if you have comments, throw your questions and comments up here. I always look at it afterwards, and I'm happy to answer some of those things. Just sending you guys lots of love, wishing you guys the best. It's part of my purpose and my passion to support you guys in what you want to do. And I'm just, in this process of sharing, I'm just being in my passion and my purpose as well. So again, wishing you lots of love. We'll see you next time.